So, your first big paper is due next Monday uh, at midnight, just as the end of your discussion is coming about. So, I thought we should go over it so you have some idea of what you're doing. Now, it's called a primary source analysis, and over the course of the semester, you're going to have 4 of them. For this first one, I have tried to make it easier for you because I have picked the primary sources from which you can choose. You need to choose 3 of the ones that I have. But for primary source analysis 2, 3, and 4, you have to find your own primary sources. So it's really important that you understand what a primary source is. A primary source is, as it says here, a first-hand account, an eyewitness account, an account from someone living in the time period in which everything is happening. So for our purposes, since this first paper is on Columbus, it's going to be someone who knew Columbus or who was Columbus or who lived in that time period and was dealing with the ramifications of what he had done. So it's someone who was there, live and in person at the time, who left a written document about it. For all of your other primary source papers, you're going to have to find the primary sources, which is part of why I wanted you to get one of the textbooks that had primary sources in them. The ones that I titled with sources, like the Von Sivers or the Strayer and Nelson or the Bentley. If it says with sources, that means at the end of each chapter, it has primary sources in it. I also want to state this to make it very clear. You need to use primary sources from the time period that the topic is from. So for this first one, we're talking about Columbus. So it's going to be people who lived in the late 14, early 1500s, or in the period of the colonization of the Western Hemisphere, phase 1, right? For your second, third, and fourth primary source papers, you're going to be using documents that are on the topics of the time period those are set in. Basically, what it's supposed to be is every 3 weeks. So for this first paper, if you were picking your own, you'd have to be finding documents that are going to cover the period from effectively 1400 to 1600. For the second paper, it's going to be effectively from the late 1600s into the early 1800s, and then so forth, depending on how it goes. You can't reuse the same documents that you've used for any other paper. It's got to be all new ones, but you only need 3. And as we go along, not this time because I've already vetted these for you, but with papers 2, 3, and 4, if you aren't sure if you should use the document or if it's a document that works or if it's actually a primary source, you can send it to me, author, title, location, and I will approve it for you. But you've got to do that by the Friday before the paper is due the following Monday. You can't be emailing me on Sunday saying this is a primary source. That's way too late. I'm a planner, a header, and I want you guys to be as well. So, but for this first paper, I've already given you choices, and the choices are right here. Anonymous, an Aztec account of the conquest of Mexico. That's supposed to be the conquest of Mexico. Another anonymous source, the Mayan account of the Spanish conquest. Extracts from Columbus's journal, as well as a letter from Columbus to Louis de Saint-Angel about his discovery. The Council of Castile, Michel de Queno, letter on the second voyage. Bartolomé de las Casas, who left us one of the best sources on what was going on in the Western Hemisphere when the conquistadors arrived. Pope Paul III, Sublimis Deus. Queen Elizabeth of Spain, or Queen Isabella, sorry, Queen Isabella of Spain. All right, so all you've got to do is pick 3 of these to use in the course of answering these questions, right? All right, so I'm going to encourage you first, though, excuse me, to watch these videos because they're going to talk about this historiographic stuff that I mentioned early on, this idea that the way we tell the story of history changes, it changes in each generation because the people living in a period are going through some stuff, and it's those filters that they use when they're looking back on things that happened in the past. Also, people in the past did things very differently from the way we do them now, and they take a lot of things for granted in the past that we don't tolerate today at all. For example, slavery. That's probably the easiest, biggest one for us to talk about today. We have a very different view on it from the way that they did in the past. So this is what we are talking about when we're talking about bias in primary sources. How to identify it, which is a really good idea because there are questions that you need to consider when you're talking about your primary sources, in much the same way that in your discussions, you're supposed to be talking about the perspective of the authors of the sources that you're reading, right? So bias and perspective, pretty much the same thing. There's a really good video on how to identify it, how to know when you're seeing it. Another very good one on how to analyze primary sources, and also the History Matters one on making sense of sources. I encourage you to watch these. I especially encourage you to watch The Rise of the West in Historical Methodology, because this is effectively a discussion of what historiography is and why so much of how we think of history today is viewed from the perspective of Western Europeans and those of us who are descended from them. So I encourage you to watch that and to think about that because that'll also give you some insights into analyzing your sources. All right, so here's the actual question itself, and I want you to look at all the things you need to be considering. Using your textbook, the other required readings for the past 3 weeks, the videos, and 3 different primary sources, which you're getting to choose from the 9 or 10 that I have up there at the top, discuss the history of Columbus Day. Why do we debate it today? Who are the Taino and why don't we celebrate them? How is the debate about Columbus Day a reflection of historiography and the ways in which our interpretation of history changes? What did the people of the time period think of the discovery, notice again those quotation marks, discovery of the New World, and how is it related to how we view it today? What biases are present in the primary sources, the video, and in your textbook? Also, in the other required readings, the Frankopan particularly. I think you've got Frankopan and you might have Harari already, but whatever sources that we've used in the past 2 to 3 weeks up to this point, mostly Frankopan, I think, what are their perspective as well, right? What is your bias and why? Why did you choose the 3 primary sources you chose? And why didn't you choose the others? It's not just a matter of what you do choose, but it's also a matter of what you leave out. Because that's bias as well. That's something you don't think is important, right? So consider these things. Remember, you have to have APA citation. Anything that you use has to be cited, and you have to cite all of the required things. So you've got to have citations for at least 3 primary sources, for your textbook, for Frankopan, and for the video, right? All right, so if you still need some help with this idea of historiography, or once again, the ways in which our interpretation of history changes, here are some really good secondary explanations, right? So I encourage you to, again, get started on this. Don't wait till the last minute. Especially don't wait till Monday and realize you don't really know what you're doing. I would get on top of this as quickly as you can. The top post for your discussion is due, obviously, Thursday by midnight, and then you've got peer comments, but that's going to leave you some time between Thursday when you turn it in and Monday to consider it. If you have questions, you can email me and ask me, but I definitely recommend you get on top of this as quick as you can.